Trying to conceive and feeling overwhelmed and confused with unhelpful information and advice? This podcast is for you. Welcome to Don't Tell Me to Relax. I'm your host, Hannah Pern, a fertility acupuncturist and passionate advocate for better fertility education and support. Our aim is to empower you with information to support your fertility journey and provide a community for connection with people who get where you're at. If you'd like to join us or work with us in clinic in London or across the UK, all the information is in the show notes at the end.
AcuPips sponsors Don't Tell Me to Relax. If you're looking for a way to naturally balance your body, calm your mind and relieve anxiety, then AcuPips has the answer. AcuPips is the UK's original ear seed company, founded by traditional acupuncturist Zoe Young. Ear seeds are small seeds or metal balls attached to an adhesive and placed on pressure points on the ear in specific combinations, creating balance within the body. We like to call it healing jewellery. Discover more today at acupips.com and use code RELAX for 20% off site-wide. AcuPips. Modern healing, ancient practice.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Don't Tell Me to Relax. I am joined today by Emma Menzies. Emma is a fertility at work coach and consultant, a former employment lawyer and a fertility patient. She helps people manage the fertility challenges and work life, which is a topic we hear all too often in our clinic. So when I met Emma at the fertility show, I said to come on to the podcast and tell us all about her work. So Emma, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here having this conversation.
So, Emma, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the work that you do?
Okay, so as you said, I'm a fertility at work coach and consultant, and I help people manage their fertility challenges and their careers in harmony and really sort of get a handle on the impact that fertility challenges might be having on their career and on their working life. And I do that through coaching, working one-to-one and online. And I also work with workplaces as well. I help organizations manage fertility in the workplace, and I do that through coaching for people who are experiencing fertility issues, but also for line managers who might be trying to support these people. And I do it through education and awareness raising for help with policy and trying to create that all important culture change of inclusivity and support around fertility matters in the workplace. So that's really what I do. Um,
And can you tell us a little bit about what drove you into that work? Because am I right in I was having a look at your website before you came on that you used to work in law
mhm.
and you went through your own fertility challenges as you were doing what sounds like quite a full on job to me.
Yeah.
So was it that then led you to do this work now? Was it that personal experience combined with the professional that made you set up your company?
Absolutely. I mean, you've hit the nail on the head there. So, my fertility journey started when I was working as an employment lawyer in Marks and Spencer, and as you said, that was a kind of full-time, consuming big job that I was doing there. And then my fertility journey, which was unexplained infertility, recurrent treatment failure, recurrent loss, was all consuming in itself, as I'm sure the people listening will be able to identify with. And trying to manage those two things together for me just it felt like an impossible job, and I really, really struggled with it. And at that time, there wasn't anybody talking about this particular challenge, both in the fertility community or in the workplace community. Like, not amongst employment lawyers and HR professionals was I hearing anything about it. So I guess that kind of compounded my feelings of failure and, you know, hopelessness because I felt like I was the only one struggling. Like, I should just be able to deal with this. But it really was a problem for me. And I kind of persevered and pushed on for 6 years with this struggle and then burnt out
Mm.
and was in a pretty dark place. And it was through counseling first and then through coaching that I moved on from that. And coaching really helped me transform myself and my life all for the better. And I decided that this gift was something I want to give back to other people. So that's when I retrained as a coach myself. And you mentioned bringing together personal and professional. And I felt, I joined up all the dots here about my personal experience and my professional experience and this new skill that I have to really help other people who are struggling as I had done. And I now knew that, of course, there were many people struggling as I had done it. It's just that it wasn't being discussed and we were all kind of struggling behind our closed doors. So that was really the inspiration. And I do think it's come a long way since then. When I first started out doing this in 2020, it was very much you say fertility at work and you'd get the oddest look like what's fertility got to do with work. Um, but that's starting to change. There's a long way to go, but it's becoming much more of a recognized and hot topic, and that's great to see. And people are really starting to grasp the nettle with it.
So, when you were going through your fertility issues, did you ever speak to your employers about what was happening?
Yeah, I did speak to my line manager and some of my team about some, not everything, about some of the stuff that I was going through. Really, at the times when I just felt, it's going to be possible to get through this unless I'm open about some of it to get the bare minimum that I needed, which was to be able to get to appointments and sort of get through the key aspects of treatment, really. But I never really fully addressed my mind to what I needed or asked for it, or even fully embraced what was made available to me, if I'm being totally honest. And I see that as a regular pattern with people that I work with, that difficulty asking for help and taking it even when it's there. And that's a lot to do with fear and fear about what people are thinking of you and what the repercussions might be. And I say that despite the fact that when I was an employment lawyer for starters, so I did actually understand what the legal landscape was. And I had a really great employer and a progressive employer. 2011 is when my journey started, and they had a fertility policy, which
Mm.
so many places don't have now. So yeah, I had a really good employer. I had a wonderful line manager and some really lovely people in my team. But I was still in that place of struggle in terms of opening up and accepting help. And it is really one of the big challenges that I try and help people with now.
And why do you think it is a challenge? Because I mean, I see it all the time in clinic. I often have, quite long conversations with a lot of patients that I'm working with about work and the impact that work's having on life and fertility treatment and how people are managing that. And often people feel that they can't have a conversation about having fertility treatment. And I often say, well, if you were having, I don't know, your appendix taken out, nobody would be hiding that. Nobody would be not having that conversation with their workplace. It would be very much spoken about and a plan would be made around that. So, why do you think that we treat a fertility issue so differently than a sort of medical? And I'm saying this because this is what people see. They see fertility and medical as different, but
Mm.
why do we not see it as the same thing?
I think it comes down to just culture and outdated, unhelpful beliefs and attitudes around the subject. I think there's a tendency to lean towards thinking that it is embarrassing, shameful, not appropriate to be discussed and talked about openly, particularly in workplaces. That keeps people silenced. I think I think we're in a bit of a vicious circle actually, in the sense that there is a reluctance on people going through it to talk about it, and part of that is to do with this feeling of that it's a sensitive subject, and you don't want to put that out there. That um, it's taboo. That's embarrassing. That's shameful. That you're not going to get support. That it's kind of a dangerous thing to do, which means we're not talking about it. So then the people who would be the people would rely upon to help us, they're either oblivious to it or they're not equipped to know how to deal with it. And so they're rocking along, not knowing, not understanding, and not getting the experience. So somehow we have to get out of this cycle where somebody's going to step out of it and make the change. And we need to get past these beliefs like that that it's doesn't really affect anybody, just one or two women, as opposed to well, you'll have talked about the stats on this podcast many times about how prevalent it is. 1 in 6 people globally. That it's not just a women's issue. That its impact is not trivial, and that actually, I think people think of it as, well, it's not life threatening. Well, actually, in some cases, it does get life threatening, as we know as well, when you're having certain procedures. But that it's life limiting and has this huge impact on all aspects of life and well-being, including at work. And I think there's a awareness raising that's needed around that as well for everybody, really, in a workplace, to be prepared to open up the conversations and make people feel like we can get past this stigma and this silence so that we can start to talk about it and start to manage it.
And in your experience, I see that people often say that, like exactly like you said, that they're worried about what people are going to think. They're worried about the shame. Often, people I find are concerned that if their boss knows that they're thinking of starting a family,
Mm.
that is then going to limit their chances of promotion, their bonuses, their pay rise, all of the things going into the future. But can you explain, like, what are the laws around that and what are the rights that protect a person in that situation?
Well, unfortunately, at the moment, there is no protection for infertility as such,
Mm.
and there's no protection for undergoing fertility treatment in the same way that there's other protected characteristics like sex and age and race, religion, and so on. But if you are struggling with infertility, it might be that there's something connected with your infertility that is protected. So, for example, if you have a condition like endometriosis that really seriously affects your day-to-day life, that may qualify as a disability, and you might have some legal protection there on the grounds of that, as opposed to the infertility in itself. And infertility is causing depression, anxiety, stress, depending on the levels of that. Again, these are things that could then fall within the protection of disability discrimination legislation. So there can be some protection around infertility, even though infertility itself isn't a protected characteristic. There's no right to time off for fertility treatment on a statutory basis. Employers might have policies which enable you to take time off. Um, so really, the point at which, in answer to your question, there's very little protection for somebody
Mm.
who's in a situation of infertility and fertility treatment until the point at which there's a pregnancy, and there is deemed to be a pregnancy, or there's a protected period so that you have protection against pregnancy and maternity discrimination starts just before the embryo is transferred, and it lasts, if that treatment doesn't work, till 2 weeks after you find out your treatment hasn't worked. If sadly you miscarry in the first 24 weeks, until 2 weeks after the miscarriage. And if you go on to have, very sadly, a stillbirth after 24 weeks, or a good outcome, and you have a live birth, and it continues throughout the maternity period. But for that protection to be in place, your employer needs to know you're pregnant. And this comes
Mm.
back to the problem that we're just discussing, that often we're not talking about it. So the best protection that anybody has is at the point of a pregnancy, but only if we're talking about it. And actually, most of the time, we don't even tell our employers we're pregnant till past that 12-week scan, which is kind of shooting ourselves in the foot to get any kind of protection at all when it's already so minimal.
Mm. So what do you advise then? So say, for example, the example that I've just given, if they don't want to discuss it with work,
Mm.
um, but they're also very, very stressed about their work situation. So they're kind of in this real catch-22. How can you help somebody, and like, given there's no law around it to protect them, like, what is your advice in that situation
Mm.
for people?
Well, I don't, as a coach, tell anybody what to do. And
Yeah.
I don't advise them to go and take these steps. So, from my point of view, there is no right or wrong answer per se. There's just a right or wrong answer for you, and
Mm.
that can change as we go on our journey. That what's right for us does change. It's something that has to be kept under review. And as a coach, I would work through those issues with somebody, and typically would look at what is it you could gain from sharing it. For example, that little bit extra legal protection potentially, or maybe just the comfort of somebody knowing. Is it someone who you could go to just to get a hug from, or is it somebody who you could get tangible support from? What is it you're looking for, and what could you get by being open? And also, what is it that's holding you back? Crucially, what is it? And then we look at, quite often it's fear of the things we said, fear of repercussions, and we look at how likely is that to happen, and if it did happen, what could you do about it? Could you handle it? And we work through these things and get to the place that's right for that individual at that time, and that does vary. For some people, it won't be right to disclose it because there'll be things that are important to them and that they value that are different to the next person. For other people, the advantages of doing it will actually outweigh the potential disadvantages. And sometimes when people work through what they think are the problems, those kind of problems dissipate, and they've always seemed bigger than they actually were. I do think, however, that it's always good to try and find somebody in a workplace that you can talk to. Two people, ideally, somebody who could be the emotional support, the kind of person for the listening and the hugs and just the hand holding, and the person who might actually be able to deliver you some tangible support as you go through. I think it's always useful to have that. And typically I hear from people that that does help them, and that when they have opened up, it's gone in a more positive direction normally than they're expecting, but that's not every case, and that's why it does need to be worked through on a case-by-case basis.
It's so difficult, isn't it? Because you're in such a trapped situation that then exacerbates the feelings of going through fertility treatment when you feel kind of like so much is out of your control. I think that when people find themselves in a workplace that's not supportive, it really can be such a difficult place to be.
It can, and I think, workplaces have a lot that they can do
Mm.
to help people, but ultimately we're in charge of our life, and we can't rely on winning the line manager lottery, the organization lottery. So we have to try and think, well, great if these people can help me, but what is it that I can do to support myself, as well as how can I make the decisions that are best for me. And to be quite honest, if you've got the absolute pits of a workplace with the pits of a manager and the pits of this, it might be the right thing for you to do. And it might seem is to look at, well, where else could I go? Is this where I want to stay? And these are the things that we work through in coaching, is where I am now, what is the right direction for me? Because it's something that people get really lost on when this big thing creeps up in their life, is where do I go from here?
And what about workplaces? Like, how many workplaces are like? Do you see a change coming from organizations? Is it happening? Or people like what percentage of organizations have got a workplace policy around fertility? Do you know?
I don't have a stat for you on that with a percentage, but it's definitely changing. And I think COVID helped in terms of pushing well-being more to the top of workplace agendas. I think, and also opening our eyes to the fact that if we absolutely need to be flexible, we can be flexible. As an employment lawyer, I definitely saw a rigidity, is that a word, to the way things that were done, where when people wanted some kind of flexibility, whatever that was for, there's kind of like a reluctance of kind of like, well, this is how we do things. Well, we do things that way because that's the way we've done them. Doesn't mean we couldn't do them a better way or a different way. And I think in COVID, we were thrown into that. And I think to some extent that it's loosened up um, or it's raised awareness of the fact that we can do things differently if we change that mindset. Um, I think a big change happened when New Zealand introduced 3 days paid bereavement leave for those who'd had miscarriages. And then we started to see a trickle effect in this country through companies changing their policies and bringing in pregnancy loss policies and fertility policies. And then just the whole menopause in the workplace has really grown, and fertility and women's health generally. There is more noise, thankfully, and more focus on these areas. And I think fertility is sort of coming along with that a little bit. It's a little bit on the coattails, I would say. But even though I don't have percentages, I am seeing that change from that person who I said started this in 2020, and I would get kind of a blank look when I talked about fertility at work, fertility in the workplaces, to people coming on board, and more companies are introducing their policies, and they're really still alert to this being an issue, and there's a long way to go, but we're on the right track. I'd love it to go faster, but it's when you're changing culture, you're like trying to move an oil tanker, and it will take time.
One of the things that I see a lot is that people often, when they're going for an appointment, so maybe it's with their GP or maybe it's with an IVF clinic, people will often take that as leave rather than take it as like a sick leave appointment, like a doctor's appointment. Like, what is there any advice you can give, or like information you can give to people around that? Because I always feel like surely this is a medical appointment and should be taken. I mean, I say that about when people come for acupuncture. I say this is a medical appointment, take it as such. But like if someone wanted to find out about that in their company, do they always go to HR? Is that the best place for them to go?
Um, Depends how it works in your company. I think this goes back to the fact that there's no legal right to this time off until, again, you fall within the legislation that's to do with pregnancy, maternity, antenatal, and so on. So you're relying on the discretion of your company, and there's a bit broad spectrum in terms of what's happening out there. Some companies have got absolutely nothing. Some have got the Rolls Royce, the fertility policies, the baby loss policies. And there's a lot in the middle where they might have a few words here and there in different policies, but one, you cannot find them. And they might be in the most extraordinary place, like a maternity policy, which isn't the first place you look when you're trying to get pregnant, and definitely not if you're a man. Or they're tagged on to in other areas, so they're not well publicized. It's almost, what's the point of having them, because you don't know it's there and you can't find it. I think it's a good place to start is if you want to have a look yourself. I don't know if you've got an intranet where your policies are. Do it before you're in the thick of it, when you've got a bit more of headspace, when you're not so entrenched in it. But it's good to have an explore and see what policies are there. Look at things like special leave, bereavement leave. These are the sort of policies, if there's not a fertility policy or a baby loss policy, a flexible working policy, these are the sort of things that might be helpful to give you what you need going through treatment. But yes, otherwise turn to HR and ask them what's available. Your line manager might be able to help you with that. It depends how things are structured in your organisation and the size of the organisation as well.
Mm. And another thing that I see all too common is people just leaving work.
Yeah.
People leaving their work because it's become overwhelming and it's become too much. So people take time off. People who have previously been really good at their jobs, have loved their jobs, and it just becomes all consuming and too much. So it's so difficult. Is there anything you can share about places that people can turn to support in that situation?
Well, I would say like a lot of there's a range again in terms of how people respond, and like there's the people like you say who go to the extreme of leaving their jobs. There's other people who step back, and there's a huge proportion of women in particular who put themselves in what I call the metaphorical departure lounge, where you're just coasting along waiting for this perpetually delayed flight that might even get cancelled, and losing your motivation, your morale, your confidence, your self-esteem, getting fed up, and life's stuck and stagnated and all of that. And then you have those who are like forging on and really pushing themselves to the point of burnout because of any issues they're dealing with to do with self-esteem and identity and self-worth, and or trying to distract themselves from what's going on. And these things, whatever you end up doing in your career, if it comes from a place of empowerment and good decision making and understanding what's right for you, then that's great. There's nothing wrong with leaving the workplace if it's right for you at this time. There's nothing wrong with going for that promotion if it's right. But what I see is these decisions being made from fear, knee jerk, and then having compounding other problems to do with other aspects of well-being, whether it's mental, emotional, financial, and so on, and people ending up in this dark place. And I think if you can, coaching is a great way of working through that, because again, it comes back to not what's right for that person over there, not what was right for you 2 years ago, but what's right for you right
Mm.
now, and being able to own that. What is it that you really, really want and what matters to you? what are the things that you value, what are your priorities, and being able to get in alignment with where you are now. And then the decisions you make, you can roll with them. And yeah, it's nothing's might be perfect, but it's the best fit. And when
Mm.
you understand why you've made that decision, it's come from the right place, it will feel good.
Yes, because we also have lots of people who are holding out for their pregnancy to get them out. They're staying in their company because they've got a good maternity policy and they want to get pregnant and have they get their maternity policy and then think again afterwards. But in that interim where maybe they're going through treatment and it's not working, or maybe they're on, they're going through investigations and that time is passing. They're not enjoying their job at that point, but they feel like they're trapped and they can't get out of it. And it's so interesting, isn't it, to find someone to help you unpick that, because it's such a difficult, complicated place to be
Yeah.
that it's hard to do that work on your own, and it's hard to find somebody in your workplace often, I imagine, to
Yeah.
who can help you think about all of the thoughts and feelings around that situation.
I think most of the challenges that people encounter to do with this sort of interconnection of fertility and career have a lot to do with um, where we're about two things. One is this sort of sense of us acting from what we think we should do, ought to do, must do, others are doing. A- And that there's this need, like one of the best things we can do for ourselves is kind of take our power back a bit, is to be able to come back to, but what is it that works for me? What do I really, really want? What do I need? What works well for me? And that is something that coaching really helps you work through and gets you on track and lets you know when you're falling off track and course correct as well. And the other thing is this narrative. There's a narrative always in our head, the stories that we're telling ourselves that's impacting how we feel and what we do and how we're experiencing life that most of the time we're completely oblivious to. And I think the more we can train ourselves to become aware of that when things don't feel right, to be able to think, what is it I'm making this situation mean? What is it I'm telling myself? And is that really true? What else could be true? In choosing the belief that serves us, the more we can get out of that. So when we're telling ourselves, uh, if I go for this job, I'll be too stressed. And if I get pregnant, everybody will think I'm totally unreasonable, and so on. If that's the narrative, is looking at that and thinking, well, is that really true? What else might these people think? What result might be in kind of exploring that and choosing the narrative that's going to actually be supportive and nurturing. And again, coaching is something that helps us do that. Most of the time, we're not aware of the blocks that we're putting in our own road. And it's to do with these preconceived ideas, these beliefs, these presumptions, these assumptions that actually, if we start to open them, pick at the way at them, we start to realize that actually maybe have more choice than we thought, and some of those choices could lead us down a road that's much better for us. And that's really, yeah, I think it can help us out of so many situations.
Mm. It's interesting, isn't it? I wonder how many men find themselves in this. It's such a female issue, isn't it? This whole, it starts before we even are pregnant. This kind of the challenges of trying to get pregnant, being pregnant, having children, being a female in the workplace it's never straightforward, is it?
I think because it's something you said earlier about the truth is people are scared about opening up about fertility because
Mm.
there's still so much fear about opening up about having children full
Yeah,
stop
yeah,
in women.
yeah,
That doesn't affect men in the same way. Like we're scared that people know that we're pregnant and we're going to have a baby, that it means, uh-oh, not
yeah,
committed to your career now. And and then it's like, okay, so I'm already a burden if I get pregnant. Well, what they're going to think of me if I need help to get pregnant. I mean, I'm literally then the lowest of the low, aren't I? I'm the biggest burden. And it comes from that. And
yeah.
that's something um, that drives a lot of the fear around talking about it that we are talking about earlier, and a lot of the thoughts around how we deal this, because there's always this assumption about what people are thinking about us, and that is very negative. And um, sometimes, there is some of that, but a lot of times we're potentially getting that wrong. And I'm always surprised by when I've feared talking to somebody, they've surprised me. Sometimes the people who I've feared most have been the biggest surprise. We don't know what other people have been through
Mm.
either. And I think, again, it's that kind of limited thinking that we assume this is how they're going to be, and we're not always right.
Mm. Yeah, it's complicated, isn't it?
It's very complicated.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't have all of the answers in our size. There's not one size fits all, but I think as individuals, as I say, those two things that I mentioned, that kind of coming back to what's really to your situation and what's right for you, and being able to work out how you're blocking yourself, that's how you can take responsibility to create a better situation for yourself without just relying on winning the line manager lottery and your workplace being, the bee's knees in terms of support.
Mm. So, Emma, if people want to find out more about working with you, and ways to work with you, can you just tell us a little bit about the kind of work that if people were interested that you do and how you can support them?
Yeah, so I support with people with many ways in which they experience this kind of challenging intersection between their fertility issues and their career. And commonly, we are finding clarity where currently there is none in terms of what their direction is, helping them set boundaries and be able to manage those boundaries, helping them in how they relate to other people at work, in the workplace about it, dealing with confidence, dealing with motivation. These are the sort of issues that are commonly coming up. But I offer everybody a free, no obligation 30-minute consultation, where we chat through what the issues are and how I may be able to support you with that, and what options are available and prices and so on. And I all do that with everybody who gets in contact with me. You can get in contact with me via my website, which is readysteadycoach.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. My handle's Emma Menzies. I do have a Ready Steady Coach account on Insta, but I have to confess to not really being active on that. It's not the best place to find me. Maybe in time I'll get there. Yeah, best place actually if you want to reach out to see if you want to have a chat to see if working with me would be the right thing for you. Then the best place to do that is via my website. Drop me an email there,
Mm.
and we can take it from there.
Thank you so much, Emma. I'm sure lots of people will be interested because it is something that, it comes up time and time and time again. And the amount of additional stress managing work
Yeah.
in through a fertility journey causes is phenomenal, actually. So, I'm sure it will be really helpful for people to have a look at your website. So, Emma, thank you so much for coming in today and telling us about your work. It's lovely to see you again.
You too. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. We hope you have found this helpful. If you'd like more on fertility education, please see our Teaching to Conceive free course linked at the end of the show. You'll also find the link to join our community. For more personalised fertility support, you can work with us one-to-one in clinic and online. You can book a discovery call to find out more.